Okie dokie. First of Chronicles, chapter 11 is our reading, so I shall give you a moment to look that up in case you would like to follow along. First of Chronicles, chapter 11 is all about, ironically, or conveniently, David's mighty men. Alrighty. Starting at verse 1 through to verse 25, so someone stop me if I go too far. Then all Israel came together to David at Hebron, saying, "Indeed, we are your bone and your flesh. Also, in time past, even when Saul was king, you were the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord your God said to you, you shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over my people Israel. Therefore, all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel, according to the word of the Lord by Samuel. And David and all Israel went to Jerusalem, which is Jebus, where the Jebusites were, the inhabitants of the land. But the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, "You shall not come in here." Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. Now David said, "Whoever attacks the Jebusites first shall be chief and captain." And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went up first and became chief. Then David dwelt in the stronghold. Therefore they called it the city of David. And he built the city around it from the Millo to the surrounding area. Joab repaired the rest of the city. So David went on and became great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. Now these were the heads of the mighty men who David had, who strengthened themselves with him in his kingdom, with all Israel, to make him king, according to the word of the Lord concerning Israel. And this is the number of the mighty men whom David had. Jeshobim, the son of Ahakmonite, chief of the captains. He had lifted up his spear against 300, killed by him at one time. After him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, the Oahite, who was one of the three mighty men. He was with David at Pasdamim. Now there the Philistines were gathered for battle, and there was a piece of ground full of barley. So the people fled from the Philistines. But they stationed themselves in the middle of that field, defended it, and killed the Philistines. So the Lord brought about a great victory. Now 3 of the 30 chief men went down to the rock to David, into the cave of Adullam, and the army of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then in Bethlehem. And David said with longing, "Oh, that someone would give me a drink of water from the well of Bethlehem, which is by the gate." So the 3 broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, David would not drink it, but poured it out to the Lord. And he said, "Far be it from me, O my God, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of these men who have put their lives in jeopardy? For at the risk of their lives, they brought it." And therefore he would not drink it. These things were done by the 3 mighty men. Abishai, the brother of Joab, was chief of another 3. He had lifted up his spear against 300 men, killed them, and won a name among these 3. Of the 3, he was more honoured than the other 2 men, therefore he became their captain. However, he did not attain to the first 3. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day. And he killed an Egyptian, a man of great height, 5 cubits tall, In the Egyptian's hand there was a spear like a weaver's beam, and he went down to him with a staff, wrestled the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. Fair enough. These things Jehoiada, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, did, and won a name among 3 mighty men. Indeed, he was more honoured than the 30, but he did not attain to the first 3. And David appointed him over his guard. All right, Matthew. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Ben, and evening everybody. So we've got our subject for the evening then, which is the mighty men of David, or David's mighty men, whichever way you want to term it. And the way we'd like to tackle this, if we can, is to just give a brief overview of the mighty men, and then look at 3 of those guys who have cool stories that Ben seemed to like as well, which is recorded for us in this chapter. So there are a few places we'll be flicking to, so apologies in advance for all of the quotation turning up. But we'll mostly be focusing on 2 Samuel 23 and 1 Chronicles 11. So if you did want to put a marker and make it easier, those would be the 2. So the mighty men of David are outlined on 5 different occasions. 1 Chronicles 11, which we've just read. 2 Samuel 23, where we'll spend some time as well. But they're also outlined in 1 Chronicles 12 on 2 separate occasions, and then in 1 Chronicles 27 as well. And just to start, we might point out the obvious, which is the fact that the word used for them is the word Gibor, and quite simply meant that these men were mighty. They stood out from the crowd, as it was. But what we'll find as we go through the passages, and I'm sure you already know from the lives of these men, is that they're interesting, and they're action-packed stories. They're great, as you grow up. But these men weren't mighty because of their acts. They were mighty because of their association with their King David. In every one of their stories, their mightiness, as it were, came from the fact that they were associated with this man. And it's because they were David's mighty men that they were mighty men at all. And so the reason, obviously, that we look at these characters ourselves is because these were effectively mighty brethren in the Ecclesia then, and we can take lessons for ourselves that we might, apply to our lives in our association with the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, since we're primarily looking at 1 Chronicles 11 and 2 Samuel 23, we might pause and ask the initial question, like, why are there 2 records, 2 lists of these mighty men that seem nearly identical? God doesn't waste any words, especially in the Bible, so that they're obviously there for a reason. And what might that be is a first kind of question that comes out, isn't it? Of course, we're all good Bible students, so you're going to tell me that it's all about what we see ahead and preceding these lists. So you see in 1 Chronicles 11 that Ben read for us, if we look at verses 9 and 10, it says that David waxed greater and greater, for Yahweh of armies was with him. These also the chief of the mighty men whom David had, who strengthened themselves with him in his kingdom and with all Israel, to make him king, according to the word of Yahweh concerning Israel. It says there specifically that they held strongly to him, is the word. This is mentioned in relation to David becoming king over Israel. This army, the army in this chapter that's identified by its leadership in these mighty men, is an obedient army, says verse 10, according to the word of Yahweh. Now come with me back to 2 Samuel 23, if you would, because there we get the context of this list in verses 1 to 4, and we get a different opening to this list of mighty men. It says, "Now these be the last words of David. David the son of Jesse said, and the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel said, the Spirit of Yahweh spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, the rock of Israel spake to me. He that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. and he shall be as the light of the morning, and the sun when the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springeth out of the earth by clear shining after rain. So you'll notice that's quite a different opening, isn't it, to this list of mighty men. And here we see a different army, albeit the same people. These are we see a man in David who had been ruling in the fear of Yahweh. And to do that ruling, he looks to a group of men that also need to rule and to judge the people in the fear of Yahweh, to enforce the rules and the judgment set. We think of the pattern, don't we, of Moses, who was unable to judge all of the people, and so he appointed those who would help him in his task. And so we see two different contexts, don't we? And what we're able to gain from these two separate versions of the same record is a fuller insight into the roles played by these mighty men. They weren't just men of war. They weren't just soldiers who fought for David. They weren't just action-packed stories to make it easy for us to read, but rather these were faithful men who held strength and power with their King David. And not only that, they themselves exacted righteous rules, the righteous rules of God upon the people that they were ruling. And so they were true leaders in their ecclesia in that sense. And so come with me then, if you would, to 1 Chronicles chapter 12, because what we see there is, as we consider these mighty men from the first time they came to David, we start to build up a picture of these men that he had with him. Because in 1 Chronicles 12, and we are kind of skipping over things for time here, but we see that there are two groups of people who fled and sought out David during his fugitive years. The first group is in verse 18. These are those who initially joined him, we know from other records, which we'll turn up in a second. It says, "Then the Spirit came upon Amasiah, who was the chief of the captains, and he said, Thine are we, David, and on thy side, thou son of Jesse. Peace, peace be unto thee, and peace be to thine helpers, for thy God helpeth thee. Then David received them and made them captains of the band." And that word is the 30, and we won't go into all the numberings this evening. But what we see then is a second group that joined down in verse 23, and they come down later for a different reason. And it says, "These are the number of the bands that were ready armed for war, and came to David to Hebron to turn the kingdom of Saul to him, according to the word of Yahweh." So that first group that came down during the fugitive years of David they were like, Robin Hood and his band of merry men. They were kind of this motley crew, we're told. And it's actually in 1 Samuel 22 that we have a description of them. And I'll read it for you if you're getting fatigued of turning things up. But it says there, "David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him." And obviously, I'm reading from the King James, which I don't think highlights fully, but gives it to us in nice Old English. It says that everyone was distressed, and everyone in debt, and everyone was discontented, gathering themselves unto him. And he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. So the people who came down to David were, they were potentially short on all money. They were completely distressed. They were discontented with just about everything that was happening in the kingdom. They were owed, or they owed lots of money. And so they came to David, and he knits them together. He brings them close and he teaches them. But that second group is a very different group of mighty men. They have the word Gibor attached to them. They came together to witness God's promises fulfilled in David, in Hebron, and thereafter in his rule. And what you'll find in the life of David is exactly what you see in the life of the Lord Jesus Christ. He takes people from whatever circumstance they find themselves in. As long as they have a zeal and an enthusiasm for the things that are right, they are brought together and they are made as one. And often when we read of these, we can think of them as just that, isn't it? Soldiers. And yet they're examples are inspiring with careful reading and show us just how powerful these people were within the Ecclesia at the time. And so come with me then, if you would, to the last mention of these mighty men, just so that we can bookend their lives. So 1 Chronicles 27, and what we see there in verse 1 is that we have the record of the children of Israel after their number coming together, and it says, to wit, the chief fathers and captains of thousands and hundreds, with their officers, that served the king in any matter of the courses, which came in and went out month by month throughout all the months of the year, of every course were 24,000. And so what we get here, and we won't read, but you can just glance down and see the same list of mighty men there, is this chapter sheds a different light on these people. Firstly, we note that it says there that they were after their number. And back in 1 Chronicles 11, verse 11, we read, and this was the number of the mighty men. And if you cast your thoughts to the New Testament, I'll read for you in 2 Corinthians, what we get is Paul picking up this same phrase, because in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 12, it says, for we dare not make ourselves of the number, or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves. And this phrase, the number, is used to describe the accepted of God, isn't it? In Revelation, the chosen are described as without number. They're also described as the number of the redeemed. And so when we consider these mighty men, what we're considering here, especially at the end of the reign of David, as it goes into the life of Solomon, prefiguring that work to come in the kingdom, is these chosen men of God, faithful and accepted by him. And we're not saying, dogmatically that these people are going to be in the kingdom, but rather that in type, they are their representative of the chosen number who would serve the king in his kingdom. And so in 1 Chronicles 27, then, we see a type of these men as the saints of the future age, because we know that under David, the land was divided into 12 portions, and the army of 24,000 men that we read there was split into 12 courses, along with the Levites and the singers. And so all this was established in the reign of King David, ready to be given to Solomon's kingdom, which so eloquently shadows the kingdom of spiritual Israel to come. And so to follow this idea of the mighty men then as these amazing scriptural brethren back to 1 Chronicles 12, what we find there in 1 Chronicles 12, verse 22, are these words. So it says 1 Chronicles 12, verse 22. For at that time, day by day, they came to David to help him until it was a great host like the host of God. And so that is speaking there about that first and second band that came to David when he was a fugitive, coming from whatever circumstance they would. And it says there at the end of the verse that they were like the host of God. And that same phrase is actually used in Genesis chapter 23, verse 6, when describing the host of the angels. And we remember, don't we, how they started out, these men, how they came to David with their problems, and yet now they're knit together like the host of God. And so what we see here then is these mighty men of David are not only mighty men of David, but they're mighty men of God through their relationship with their king, which indeed gives us some hope with our relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ of things to come. And I won't go into it for time, but we know, of course, what the New Testament says about our own warfare. Paul writing in Romans talks of, the law that is in his own mind, bringing into captivity sin, and how we have to fight against those things in our lives. And so I really like these stories, because as we go through them in a little bit, what we'll see is they're really quite over the top. I think Ben was kind of laughing at one point, These stories really present us with these bizarre numbers of people who were killed or acts that were done. And they're kind of a bit over the top, you might say. But it's illustrating to us, isn't it, the task at hand. The fact that sin in our lives is not easy to overcome. You have to go to these extraordinary lengths in order to defeat it within our own selves. And Paul says, in short, developing that spiritual mind is hard work. You don't just wake up one day, do you, and decide to have a spiritual mind. It's a constant battle, a conscious campaign, winning, losing, but always being ready to fight those battles. And, I'm an armchair general, so I can't say with much certainty, but I'm sure, a soldier would say that any great campaign, it takes a good deal of strategy, of planning, of training. And what's being shown to us in Paul's usage of this word, and this phrase and this concept, is that we've got to make a conscious effort every single day when we wake up to fight for our God against the things that would naturally be our inclination. And so that's just a brief overview then to the mighty men of David. And what we'd like to do is have a look at three of those together. So the first one, and Ellis turned to me and said, I think Ben's reading wrong, but it was just because it was a different translation. And actually, your translation didn't help me with a couple of things. It made things worse. So we'll see in a second. But the first man that we'd like to have a look at was the first man we encountered in 1 Chronicles 11. And that's in verse 11. So it says, this is the number, in my translation, of the mighty men of David, whom David had. Jashabim and Hachmonite, the chief of the captains. He lifted up his spear against 300 slain by him at one time. And so we have Jashabim here, the Hachmonite, as head of the three. And if you've got that marker in, come over to 2 Samuel 23 and verse 8. We have the same person recorded, slightly different number, but it says, these be the names of the mighty men whom David had, the Hachmonite that sat in the seat, chief among the captains. The same was Adino the Eznite. He lifted up his spear against 800 whom he slew at one time. And sorry, I meant to say, Alice did also ask me if he's maybe listening from the back there, to tell him when we came to the stories rather than the drivel that I said beforehand. So we're on to the fun stuff, Alice. So we've got this guy here then, haven't we? Jashabim the Hachmonite. And the word Hachmonite means wise one or a wise one. And in verse 8 here, it says he slew 800 men at one time. And it's not the nicest thing to think about, but if we just think about that for a second, this man, he sought out the enemy, his enemy, and he found them. And he saw that they were a great multitude, 800 people. I don't know if I can equate this for us, like if you look at the Manitoulin photos, there's probably 200 people there. So you're times in that by 4. There's 800, but these are grown men, armored. And he doesn't run away, does he? Instead, what does it say? He lifted up his spear and fought. And brothers and sisters, I don't know about you, but if you saw 800 fully grown men, and you decide to face them down, what would you use as your weapon? I don't know if you've ever thrown a spear or maybe fashioned a spear, but in order to get that to work properly as you need it, you're going to have to throw it as hard as you can, and then you're going to have to pull that thing out and throw it again. And this guy is doing it 800 times, facing man after man after man. And it's incredible, isn't it, to think about the stamina that you would need and the courage to face all of these. But if I was, I definitely wouldn't choose a spear as my choice. And I wonder then, why is it recorded that he used a spear? Well, come over, if you would, to Psalm 57 with me. Hopefully we're not stretching this too much. but wait until you come to the next one. Joachim's going to love it. So much conjecture. But Psalm 57, just for this one, we'll see in verse 4 there, it says, "My soul is among lions. I lie even among them that are set on fire, even the sons of men, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongues a sharp sword." And so what's being said here, isn't it, that the spears are representative, along with those other implements that are mentioned there, of the mouth, and by extension, the words. And so I think, to me at least, what's been drawn out on a spiritual plane is in 1 Chronicles 11, verse 11, what you have is Jashabim the wise, who slew 800 enemies of God with the wise words of his mouth. It's showing to us, brothers and sisters, that evil can be defeated by the godly words that we speak. This man crushed sin symbolically 800 times in the day through the power of God's word. Something for us to perhaps consider in our lives with how we use our words and whose words we are using. So back in 1 Chronicles 11 then, in verse 12, what we get then is the next person. And I guess, if you have favorites, maybe different people like different of the mighty men, but for me, it's probably the next chap. So it says in verse 12 that after him was Eleazar, the son of Dodo, and Ahoahite, who was one of the three mighties. And we'll just start to build a picture, which we'll come back to in a second, with the words. But Eleazar there means whom God helps, and Dodo, rather than being the little extinct bird, means belonging to the beloved. And Ahoahite is a family name meaning at rest. Verse 13, isn't it? Is that here was a faithful man who stood with David in a place called Pas Dammim. Now, the only other usage of this is the word Ephes Dammim, and it's actually back in 1 Samuel 17, verses 1 to 2. And off the top of your heads, does anybody know what is recorded for us in 1 Samuel 17? Yeah, there we go. I saw a nod, but I wanted to affirm that you actually did know. Yeah, so it's David and Goliath. It's where Goliath challenged Israel. And this incident is a repeat here, isn't it? The Philistines are back yet again. Many years on in the life of David, they're seeking revenge on the very same field. They had a sense of humor, these guys. So they've come back to that very same place. Even though they had witnessed God's salvation once, what do the people of Israel do? Well, it says, and there the Philistines were gathered together to battle, and there was a parcel of ground full of barley, and the people fled from before the Philistines. You've got to set the scene, brothers and sisters. It's a valley there, Ephes Dammim. And down at the bottom, you've got this field of barley, and they were set in array, the Israelites on the one mountain and the Philistines on the other. And the word Ephes Dammim, as opposed to Pas Dammim, means in the Hebrew a boundary of blood. On this site where there'd been so much conflict, these two enemies met, and the Israelites perhaps saw the number of the Philistines. And here's the conjecture. I can just say, as I'm building this picture, at least in my mind, that they come to David and they say, there's too many of them. Perhaps they pleaded with David, because it's specifically mentioned, it's a patch of barley. Why are we defending this? It's the most humble of the crops. We give it to the cows, we give it to the poor people. Why defend this? Let's go back to one of the cities of Judah. And yet perhaps David, may have said that whether they stood there in a field of barley or whether it was a city of Judah, that this was God's inheritance. For him, it would have had so much more meaning because of the incident with Goliath. And yet these people leave. In 2 Samuel 23, the parallel record, it says in verse 9, after him was Eleazar the son of Dodo the Ahoahite, one of the three mighty men of David, when they defied the Philistines that were gathered together to battle, and the men of Israel were gone away, these people fled. They left their king. And whatever David might have been doing, when he looked up, his army was gone. And only one man was left, Eleazar, the son of Dodo, because he belonged to the beloved and was the one whom God helped. And it says that these two men, against just enormous odds, defended God's inheritance. 1 Chronicles 11:14 says for us that they set themselves in the midst of that very same parcel and delivered it and slew the Philistines, and Yahweh saved them by a great deliverance. For me, this is, the margin actually says, and Paul uses the same phrase in Ephesians, that having done all, stand fast with the whole armor of God. It said that they stood their ground. And brothers and sisters, if that field had contained, something precious to us, if it had contained, something of huge wealth, maybe we would have defended it. But if you looked up and there's just these two guys, why are they defending this patch of ground with barley in it? And yet it was God's inheritance, as we have said, and it was a place of such significance to David that these two men defended it without giving back. And it's perhaps a lesson for us, isn't it? All too often in the world around us, we might feel alone at work or school, and often, it's easier to fit in. It's easier to get absorbed in the crowd, and yet these two guys didn't. They stood their ground for what they knew was best. And you can just imagine the scene, or at least I can, as the Philistines run down that field, and these two guys are back to back fighting. And 2 Samuel 23 verse 10 says that Eleazar arose and he smote the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand clave to the sword. You can imagine, can't you, this man with David as the enemy comes, and he's hacking and he's thrusting and he's slashing and he's defending himself and his king from arrow and from spear and from sword, just to take on the next advance. As a whole army comes against these two men. And it says that he fought with such fervor that his hand clave to his sword. That sword which we know to be the sword of the Spirit, as Paul says in Ephesians 6. There was no way that this man, Eleazar, was going to lose his grip on his Bible. He couldn't leave go of that sword of the word. And it's a challenge, isn't it, for us? I think it's a cool story, but it's so much more than that. Am I holding on to the Bible so much that we have cramp in our hands? He couldn't open his hand for how tightly he held on to the things that would provide him with life. And it's of course impossible that these two men, surrounded as they were, could have fought the army of the Philistines on their own. And yet it says that God wrought the victory. And so there's hope for us, isn't there? Even though the tides of the world come on us, as it were, we can do all things through Christ who strengthens us. And what I love here is that there's as often the case, a second layer that is created for us with the meaning of the words. For me, it's one of those gems that Ben mentioned in his prayer. Because here we have Eleazar, which we said means God is my helper. And we have David, the beloved. And it says here they're in Pas Damin. And in the Hebrew, that means a dell or a palm of blood. And so the enemies of the beloved gathered against him at a time when the ground was full of barley. And we know, of course, that happened in the month Abib, when there was a Passover. And in that very place, Yahweh wrought the victory. And it's a picture, isn't it, of the beloved, a man who knew perfectly that God was his helper. And he had blood in the palms of his hands, fighting against sin at the Passover. And we know, of course, that Yahweh wrought a great salvation in the wonderful act of the Lord Jesus Christ, which is prefigured here in the words or in the meaning of these names. And so finally, in our considerations tonight, we'd like to have a look at 1 Chronicles 11, verse 15. Now, I said we wouldn't get into it, and this is where Ben's translation, opened up the next study, perhaps, because it talked about the 2 different sets of 3, which happen later on in the chapter. But for now, I just wanted to focus on the little incident that happens before we get to the last man that we'd like to consider. Because here we have 3 men who are captains amongst 30. And it says in verse 15, and perhaps we won't read it all for time, but we know that David was camped there, and the Philistines were also encamped in the valley of Rephaim. And David kind of passes this comment, doesn't he? Or at least it seems from the record that he sort of said, oh man, I love that well and the water that's in it. If only I could drink of that. And it says that these 3 guys decide, you know what? If David wants that water, we're going to go and get it. And in verse 18, it says that they break through the host of the Philistines to draw water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate. They took it and brought it to David. And it's just so uneloquent, isn't it, in the English? You can read that and you kind of gloss over it and you don't really see what it means. But, Bethlehem obviously was David's hometown, and it was, probable that his family who he'd sent to Moab were being searched for by the Philistines. And so he makes this comment, and off these guys go. And these days, if it was a movie or anything that my son likes, they would go parkour. They'd go in the shadows and they'd get the water from the well and they'd make it back to David, and, oh man, that's awesome. But actually what it says that they break through in verse 18. The Hebrew there is to cleave open. These guys literally decided, you know what? If David wants it, we're going to battle through the middle of the Philistine host. We're going to cleave our way through the host, not go round, not in the shadows, not on the rooftops, fighting the whole way to the well, while one of them draws up the water, only to fight their way back and give it to David. I mean, these guys were risking their lives for a drop of water for their king. They would do anything. And I ask myself in my life, and I don't know about you and yours, will you do anything for your king? To get that water from the well and to bring it back to him. These 3 would do anything and risk their lives for David. So much so that, as we see, he pours it out as an offering to Yahweh, because he says, clearly you've saved their lives, because they went right through the middle of this host. And of the 3, 2 are mentioned, or at least if you count them as the same 3, or if not, we'll go on to the second lot of 3. But Abishai is mentioned there, and then we won't talk about him because he's similar to Jashubim, but then the other one is Benaiah. And we won't look at it for time, but we know from the life of David that many of these men who joined themselves when he was in the fugitive years and on the run, they stuck with David, and they're given roles, as we saw briefly, in the kingdom of his son and in his kingdom when he reigned. But as we look at Benaiah, we find out a lot of information is contained on him during the reign of David, and it kind of signifies to us the spiritual role that he fulfilled. And firstly, if we compare the 2 records, if you will, and then 2 Samuel 8, and we'll come on to 2 Samuel 20. But in 2 Samuel chapter 8, if you go there, we have David at the beginning of his reign. So he's in Jerusalem, about to begin his reign. I didn't put down the verse. Verse 15, it says, "And David reigned over all Israel, and David executed judgment and justice unto all his people." So you've got him as the great king here. "And Joab the son of Zeruiah was over all the host, and Joshaphat the son of Ahilud was recorded. And Zadok the son of Ahitub and Ahimelech the son of Abiathar were the priests, and Seraiah was the scribe." So we're being outlined now, the men who were in his part of his reign and had leadership roles and what they were. And then it says, "Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over both the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were chief rulers. So here we have Benaiah and his role at the start of David's reign. And remember, he's reigned for 7 years in Hebron and now over the consolidated kingdom. And this is the role that he's given. We'll come over, if you would, to 2 Samuel 20. Because what we see here is at the end of David's reign, 33 years later, what's recorded of verse 23. Now Joab, he's there as well, and Benaiah, it says, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and over the Pelethites. And again, we have a list of some of the leadership roles that were performed. And so one of Benaiah's jobs for over 33 years was to be captain not only over the 30, as we saw in 1 Chronicles 27, but also over these Kerethites and over the Pelethites. Now, I'm sure many of you know it, but the Kerethites, they were executioners. That's what the word means. And so this priest was a captain of executioners. And the Pelethites were known as couriers or messengers. It's, don't have a very good postal system here, but in the UK we do. And it's very useful, obviously, to get messages as and when you need them if you are the king. So we've got executioners and messengers. To me, at least, that seems like an odd group of people, doesn't it? Well, come, if you would, to Zephaniah, just to add some context to these guys. Again, I'm sure we know this, but I do need to keep people awake during my talk. So in Zephaniah, chapter 2, and verse 4, what we read is, jumping straight in out of context, but it says there, for Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out of Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. So where are all these cities? What nation are they part of? Again, just keeping you awake. Philistines, so, or Philistines, if that's what you said, Joachim. But they're all cities of the Philistines, aren't they? So what we're being presented with here is this particular area. And then what does it say in verse 5? Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Kerethites. And so what we see here is that we have King David. He's now ruling over all of the nations of Israel. And he appoints a priest over executioners and couriers who were likely Philistines. And come with me then, if you would, to 1 Samuel 30. Because in 1 Samuel 30 and verse 13, what we see there is a little bit more about these guys. And so in verse 13, again, jumping in without too much context, but David says unto this Egyptian chap, to whom belongest thou, and whence art thou? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite, and my master left me because 3 days ago I fell sick. We made an invasion upon the south of the Kerethites and upon the coast which belongeth to Judah. And we see, obviously, that they burnt Ziklag with fire. And so these Philistines of the sea coast were in the region of the land of Judah. And what we see, if you look at the history of them, is that they were most likely mercenaries. And that's not untoward of kings of the time. You'd hire mercenaries as your personal bodyguard. If you paid them right, then they'd look after you. And so when it, in as much as they would be your last line of defense. If somebody was breaking in to kill the king, the last line of defense were these personal bodyguards who would execute those who were trying to kill the king. And very much when we talk about the couriers, they were almost like the secret service of the time. I was going to make a joke, but does Canada have a secret service? I don't know. If they do, Oh, it's too secret. Yeah, okay. Well, the non-secret secret service of the UK, the MI6, is well known. This is your MI6, these guys. Somebody didn't like what I said. But if we think about that for just a second, if you're going to put somebody over your secret service and your personal bodyguards, what qualities would you look for in that man? Like, you'd want utter loyalty and complete faithfulness from this person who is in charge of your life day to day. And so this is telling us something about the man Benaiah. Because what we saw from 2 Samuel 8 to 2 Samuel 30 was that he proved his loyalty and his reliability for over 3 decades, still doing that same job from start to finish. And in 1 Chronicles 11, verse 22, we read those acts that he did. And we won't go to it, I don't think, for time, but we know that he was Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. And what's recorded for us in 1 Chronicles 27, verse 5, is that Jehoiada was a chief priest. So here's the son of a chief priest, not even a priest, who had chosen to fight in David's army, a man with the right to the priesthood, who had chosen to be a soldier, a warrior priest, you might say. And we see the acts that are recorded of him, and I won't read them again, or maybe I will. But it says that he was more honorable than the two. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, it says that he slew 2 lion-like men of Moab. He went also down into a pit and slew a lion on a snowy day, and then he slew the Egyptian. And I don't know if you've ever seen lions at the zoo or African lion safari or whatever, but they're pretty big, and they radiate this kind of raw power. And yet what we've been told is that this man faced off against 2 lion-like men that had great renown. And we know we won't go to it again, but in 1 Peter 5, it talks about, the lion-like aspects that come against us with the enemies of the world. And we imagine the courage it must have taken for him to face them. And it says that he went down then and slew a lion in a pit on a snowy day. And again, on first reading, you kind of just think, well, he's daft. Like, just leave the lion where he is in the pit. Like, why is this recorded for us? But you see, in the time, in which he lived, when there was snow on the mountains, the lions would come down to the warmer valley floors. And the problem is that one of these lions has fallen into a pit. And again, the pitfalls of the King James and the English, that word actually means either a cistern, so a large cavern that was created to hold water, or a fountain or a well. And so you've got this water that brings life in the true sense and obviously in the spiritual sense as well. And the problem is now you've got a lion down there. You can't put your bucket down to draw the water out because there's a lion down there. You can't shoot him because the blood will foul the water before you could get the carcass out. And so somebody's got to go down into this well with a lion, kill it, and bring it up quickly. Because you wouldn't see me volunteering for it. And yet Benaiah did, didn't he? He went down into a well or a cistern, whatever it was, with an angry lion, whether he was able to pace around or whether he was confined and lashing out. Because Benaiah knew the words, I'm sure, not that he knew them at the time, but we know from Isaiah 12 that with joy we draw water from the well of salvation. And so something, no matter what it was, that hinders us from drawing that water must be dealt with. And Benaiah knew that, and he had the faith and the courage to overcome. And so finally we see that verse that was read for us, that he slew an Egyptian, a man of great stature, 5 cubits in height, an Egyptian with a spear in his hand like a weaver's beam. And he went down with a staff, and he plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and slew him with his own spear. And just as an aside, we did this in Sunday school, so maybe I'll ask Ben. How tall was Goliath? How many cubits do we reckon? I'm being facetious. So the Masoretic text says that Goliath was 6 cubits, but some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Josephus and the Septuagint, say he was 4 cubits. So I like to think in the kingdom, Benaiah and David are going to, continue the argument of who killed the bigger man. But the point here is that there was a big guy. He was just under or just over the height of Goliath. And you can see why David was so attracted to this guy. He set him over his personal guard because of all these acts and because of his affinity with him personally, I think, with this particular incident. And Benaiah went on to do great things in the kingdom of David and the kingdom of Solomon. And throughout Kings and Chronicles, time and time again, Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, with the personal guard of the king, working that necessary work for the kingdom. And so thanks for bearing with me through all of those quotes. But what hopefully we've seen as we've considered the mighty men of David, or rather the mighty men of God, is their paramount faith, isn't there? Their full dependence on God. They couldn't have done the things that they did that are recorded for us. Hopefully we've seen how their lives were focused and their aim truly was to serve their king, to lay down their lives if necessary for him. And so, brothers and sisters, let's consider our own walk, our own service to our king, that when he sees our works, he may appoint us to be faithful guardians like Benaiah. And like Benaiah, let our service in our lives now, brothers and sisters, continue even into the kingdom, we pray, that will be set up on the earth, that we might be warrior priests for our God and King. Am I waiting, Ben, or am I... Okay. If there's any comments and or questions? Well, it's not on what I talked about, so I'm not sure if I'll answer. But no, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure, like many of the others, there's numerous things that are recorded. So it may have been different incidents. I'm not sure. It's definitely the same guy, and we didn't go into kind of why in 2 Samuel 23 there's the throne or the seat that he sits on, and what his other name, Adino the Ezonite, means sharp spear. But no, I'm not sure. Do you? No. Does anyone? I'm not sure.
So just before the children of Israel went into the land, and Moses gave them all the blessings and the curses, that was in chapter 28. Chapter 32, this would probably fall into the blessing in verse 30. It says, one shall speak 1,000, and 2 shall put 10,000 to fight. And it reminds me of what you said when they go through the Philistines to get that water. And as long as they were being blessed by God, they were following God, then they would receive that blessing. That one would take on 1,000, and 2 of them would take on 10,000. And then Joshua also repeats that in Joshua chapter 23, verses 1 of you chase 1,000. And it was the encouragement. So these men of David must have had that mindset that they were able to go there and chase 1,000 and not even think twice about it.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, eh? And maybe that's the explanation, Ben. It's 800 plus 300 is over 1,000, so. Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like it was over the top, the things that are recorded. I don't think it's necessarily wanting us to consider how does one man kill 800 men in one sitting. It's more the fact that these things were done by God and the spiritual connotation that they had based on the blessings, for sure.
Did you come across your study the anecdote about Alexander the Great? It's very similar to David in the water.
No, I didn't.
It's kind of interesting. So when Alexander the Great was crossing the Iraqi desert, almost the exact same scenario happened. Everybody was dying of thirst, and Alexander's men brought speak of how widely known the kingship of David was. Because even though that happened, 700 years after David, he would have been seen as a warrior king figure, throughout the Near East. So,
That's interesting.
yeah, kind of cool.
Yeah, and yet they refuted that David even exists until that tile that they found on the floor. Yeah, crazy. Yeah.
So it takes a bit of time to say that, these men were part of 30, but they weren't like 3, and something like the first 3 or second 3, but not the first 3. Like, why? Do you have any idea why, tensions brought out to that? I have no. I've always wondered. It's like, they're good, but not that good.
Yeah, there's the 2 sets of 3 and multiple sets of 30, it would seem. No, I'm not too sure. I haven't really looked into it too much, which is why when Ben got up and read his version, that was sort of, the chapter says, of these 3, there was Abishai and then there was Benaiah, but Ben was reading, not of those 3. So I was like, now people are going to ask questions about the 3s. And that's what I didn't intend. No, I don't. Maybe others do. I haven't really looked into it yet. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Okay, I think that's the lot.
There's something bad happened inside the house in the middle of another crime or a home invasion. Here's an 84-year-old woman alone and easy egress.
Thank you, Matthew.
The back of
Oh, I neglected to find out who's up for next week. Does anyone know? Anyone volunteering to do next week's class? I don't have a schedule on me. I know I'm up in 2 weeks, but no? Okay, well, I guess listen up and wait for the announcement on Sunday.
That would be me.
Are you all right? We all find out at the same time, Brother Sean included by the sounds of it. All right, what are you doing? Do you know what you're doing it on? Or you sort of...
Yes, it's the second to Stories of Salvation.
Stories of Salvation, the second one, part 2. Lovely. Okie dokie. All right, we will wrap up this evening with hymn 133, and then I shall pray. Our great and loving Father, we thank you for being so wonderful and blessing us with this evening that we can study your word. We ask you to help us to leave here this evening encouraged and refocused on our walk and our service before you. Help us to shine as lights in the world around us, manifesting your character and showing your love to those we interact with. We thank you for blessing us. We thank you for the food now as well. Help us to always appreciate the wonderful blessings you give to us daily. Most of all, we ask that you would send your Son to set up your kingdom very soon. Please hear our prayer because we ask it in your Son's name. Amen.